grab their attention immediately. If you believe in justice, respect for children, and military honor, please like and subscribe to our channel right now. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss stories about real courage, real fathers, and real consequences for those who abuse their power. Let's get started. Asterisk, asterisk. The courtroom was cold and silent. 12-year-old Marcus Williams stood alone in the middle of the room, his small frame trembling like a leaf in the wind. He was there to testify against his own mother, a decision that had taken every ounce of courage a child his age could possibly gather. She had hurt him. She had hurt other children, and someone had to tell the truth. But when Marcus started to speak, his voice cracking with fear, the bailiff, a large, intimidating man named Officer Derek Collins, decided that a nervous child's fidgeting was somehow a threat to the court. Without warning, without provocation, Officer Collins grabbed 12-year-old Marcus by the arm and shoved him hard to the ground. The boy's head cracked against the wooden floor. He cried out in pain and fear. And that's when Colonel James Williams, sitting in the back of the courtroom in his full military dress uniform, stood up, his voice quiet but commanding, cut through the stunned silence. "He's my son." Everything changed in that moment. Build the story slowly and clearly. To understand the full weight of that moment, we need to go back 3 years. Colonel James Williams was one of the most respected military officers in the United States Armed Forces. At 52 years old, he had served his country for 30 years. He had commanded thousands of soldiers. He had been decorated for valor and leadership. His record was spotless. His reputation was unquestionable, but his personal life had fallen apart. When Marcus was born, Colonel Williams was not ready to be a father. He was a young soldier, focused entirely on his career and his duties. Marcus's mother, Angela, had been a wonderful woman at first, or so Colonel Williams had thought. But after Marcus was born, something changed in her. The joy in her eyes turned dark. The love she expressed became twisted. Colonel Williams was away on military deployments for long stretches. When he came home, he noticed things, small things at first. Marcus would flinch when his mother raised her voice. He would retreat into himself during family dinners. He would have unexplained bruises that Angela always explained away as falling while playing. But Colonel Williams was a soldier. He had been trained to focus on the mission, to suppress doubt, to trust authority. So when Angela insisted that Marcus was simply clumsy, that he was a difficult child who needed firm discipline, Colonel Williams wanted to believe her. It wasn't until Marcus was 9 years old that Colonel Williams saw his son being hit by his mother for spilling a glass of juice. He witnessed his ex-wife. They had divorced when Marcus was 5, striking his son across the face with an open hand while Marcus cowered and begged for forgiveness. Something broke inside Colonel Williams that day. He fought through the family court system to gain full custody. Angela fought back viciously. She claimed Colonel Williams was an absent father who couldn't possibly take care of a child. She said he was too busy with the military. She painted a picture of Colonel Williams as an unfit parent, while she portrayed herself as a devoted mother. The judge, influenced by Angela's testimony and her lawyer's arguments, granted her primary custody. Colonel Williams could only see Marcus on weekends and during military leave. It was a decision that haunted him every single day. But Marcus was trapped. For 3 more years, Marcus endured emotional and physical abuse at his mother's hands. He went to school bruised. He came home terrified. He learned to be invisible, to be quiet, to do nothing that might trigger Angela's rage. And then when Marcus turned 12, something happened that changed everything. Build emotional connection through conflict. Marcus had finally told someone about the abuse. He confided in his school counselor, Mrs. Patterson, a kind woman who had been patient with Marcus during his difficult years. Mrs. Patterson didn't dismiss him. She didn't minimize his experience. She believed him immediately and reported it to Child Protective Services. An investigation was launched. Angela was arrested on charges of child abuse. And now, 3 months later, Marcus was sitting in a courtroom, about to testify in a case that could determine whether his mother would face criminal consequences and whether he might finally be safe. Colonel Williams had taken emergency leave from his military posting to be there. He sat in the back of the courtroom in his full dress uniform, decorated with medals and insignia. He wanted Marcus to know, even from across the room, that his father was there, that he wasn't alone. Marcus was terrified. The prosecution called him to the stand to describe the abuse he had endured. As Marcus began to speak, his hands shaking so violently that he could barely hold them still, he started to explain what had happened. He described the times his mother had hit him. He described the nights she had locked him in his room without food. He described the emotional torment and the constant fear that governed his life. His voice grew stronger as he spoke. He was scared, but he was also brave. He was telling the truth. But when Angela's defense attorney began cross-examining Marcus, trying to confuse him and cast doubt on his testimony, Marcus became overwhelmed. He began to shift nervously in his chair. His breathing became shallow. He was having what was clearly a panic attack brought on by the trauma and the stress of reliving his abuse. That's when Officer Derek Collins decided to take action. Officer Collins had been working as a bailiff in the courthouse for 8 years. He was known for being aggressive, for having a hair-trigger temper, and for having absolutely no patience with what he considered disruptions to court proceedings. He saw Marcus's nervous movements not as the signs of a traumatized child, but as defiance and disrespect for the court. "Stop moving around," Collins commanded, his voice harsh and threatening. Marcus froze, his fear intensifying. "You need to sit still and answer the questions you're asked," Collins continued, stepping toward the witness stand. "He's having a panic attack," the Judge Sarah Morrison, said quietly but firmly. Officer Collins stepped back. But Officer Collins didn't step back. Instead, he grabbed Marcus by the arm, hard enough to bruise. He yanked the terrified boy out of the witness chair and shoved him toward the floor with unnecessary force. Marcus's small body crumpled. His head struck the wooden floor with a sickening crack. For a moment, the entire courtroom gasped in shock. Marcus lay on the floor crying, his face streaked with tears, blood trickling from a small cut on his forehead where he'd struck the ground. He was 12 years old. He was a victim of abuse, and he had just been physically assaulted by a man whose job was to protect the integrity of the court. That's when Colonel James Williams stood up. Hashtag justice and revelation. "He's my son," Colonel Williams said quietly, but his voice carried the weight of command, the authority of a man who had led thousands. He stepped forward from where he'd been sitting in the back of the courtroom. Everyone turned to look at him. Officer Collins's face went pale. He let go of Marcus immediately. Colonel Williams walked to his son, kneeled beside him, and gently helped him up. He cradled the boy in his arms and looked directly at Judge Morrison. "Your Honor," Colonel Williams said, "my son was assaulted by an officer of this court while testifying as a victim of abuse. I demand to know on what authority Officer Collins believes he had the right to place his hands on a child." Judge Morrison's face had turned crimson. She was furious. "Bailiff Collins," she said, her voice sharp as a knife, "step back from the witness stand immediately." "Judge, he was being disruptive," Officer Collins tried to explain. "I don't care if he was standing on his head, singing the national anthem," Judge Morrison interrupted. "You do not, under any circumstances, lay hands on a witness, especially not a child. You are suspended from duty effective immediately. Security, please escort Officer Collins out of my courtroom." 2 security officers stepped forward and escorted Officer Collins out while he protested and tried to justify his actions. Judge Morrison turned to Marcus, her expression immediately softening. "Marcus, are you okay?" she asked gently. Marcus, still shaken, nodded against his father's chest. "Colonel Williams," Judge Morrison continued, "your son should receive medical attention. A recess is in order." What happened next would echo far beyond that courtroom. News of the incident spread quickly through the courthouse and then into the local media. "Military officer's son assaulted by bailiff during abuse trial," the headlines read. Social media exploded with outrage. Videos of the incident, captured by someone with a camera phone, went viral online. The police department launched an immediate investigation into Officer Collins's conduct. They discovered a pattern. Over his 8 years as a bailiff, Collins had been unusually aggressive with juveniles. There were 8 complaints on file that had never been properly addressed. Some of them involved minor children who had been roughly handled for seemingly minor infractions. The district attorney announced that they would be pressing charges against Officer Collins. He was charged with assault on a minor and abuse of authority. He faced the possibility of going to prison, but the story didn't end there. Judge Morrison declared a mistrial in Angela's case due to the courtroom disruption. However, because of the clear evidence of Marcus's injuries, his testimony, and the corroborating statements from his school counselor and medical professionals, Angela was arrested again on new charges, this time with a different judge in a different courtroom. The prosecution was able to present their case without interruption. Angela Williams was convicted of child abuse and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Marcus was safe. #, the moral takeaway. 3 months after Officer Collins was convicted and sentenced to 18 months in prison, Colonel Williams stood with Marcus in front of a judge in family court. This time, it was a hearing to finalize Colonel Williams' custody of his son. The journey had been long. The trauma had been deep. But Marcus, with his father's support and professional counseling, was beginning to heal. "Marcus," the judge asked gently, "do you want to live with your father?" Marcus looked up at Colonel Williams, saw the pride and love in his father's eyes, and nodded. "More than anything," Marcus said, his voice strong and clear. The judge signed the order. Custody was awarded to Colonel James Williams. Marcus was finally home. What the story teaches us. This story is about much more than one child suffering or one officer's abuse of power. It speaks to something fundamental about our society and our values. First, the story reminds us that children deserve protection, even in places that are supposed to be about justice. A courtroom should be a safe space where truth can be told. When a child is called to testify, especially about abuse, that child deserves to be treated with gentleness and respect. Officer Collins violated that sacred trust. He represented an institution that had failed Marcus once already, and he failed him again. Second, this story shows us the power of one person standing up. Colonel Williams didn't yell. He didn't create a scene. He simply spoke the truth with quiet authority. "He's my son." 3 words that changed everything. He used his privilege, his uniform, his rank, his presence, to protect a child who had no power of his own. And in doing so, he held an entire system accountable. Third, the story teaches us about the responsibility we have to protect children from abuse. Judge Morrison took immediate action when she saw the assault. She didn't downplay it. She didn't make excuses. She recognized that something profoundly wrong had happened, and SE responded with swift justice. That's what leadership looks like. And finally, this story reminds us that real fathers show up. Colonel Williams could have stayed focused on his military career. He could have let the system handle his son's case. But instead, he fought. He took leave from the military. He sat in that courtroom in his dress uniform to show his son that he was there, that he cared, that his son mattered more than anything else. That's what a real father does. The aftermath. Officer Derek Collins was released after serving 15 months of his 18-month sentence with good behavior. But he never worked in law enforcement again. His conviction made him unemployable in that field. He became a cautionary tale, a warning about what happens when you abuse your power. Judge Sarah Morrison became an advocate for better training of courthouse staff on trauma-informed practices. She worked with the district attorney to create new protocols for handling child witnesses in cases involving abuse. Because of her efforts, other children in similar situations would be treated with far more compassion and care than Marcus had been. And Marcus Williams? He grew up knowing that his father had stood up for him when it mattered most. That knowledge became the foundation for his own sense of self-worth and his own commitment to standing up for what's right. Years later, Marcus would write about his experience in a school essay about courage. He wrote, "Courage isn't about being big or strong or having power. Courage is about standing up when everything inside you is afraid. My dad showed me that courage when he stood in that courtroom and claimed me as a son, and that gave me the courage to claim my own life back." A message about power and responsibility. The truth that this story reveals is this: power is most dangerous when combined with lack of empathy. Officer Collins had power. The power is uniform, his authority, his position. But he had no empathy for the terrified child in front of him, so his power became a weapon. Conversely, Colonel Williams used his power, his rank, his presence, his influence, with deep empathy for his son. So his power became a shield. It became protection. It became justice. We are all given power of some kind. Maybe it's the power to speak up in meetings at work. Maybe it's the power to protect our own children. Maybe it's the power to vote or to influence our communities. The question is, will we use that power to harm or to heal? Will we use it to oppress or to protect? Colonel Williams chose to protect. And in that moment, in that courtroom, when he stood up and said, "He's my son," he showed us exactly what it means to use power with wisdom and with love. Hashtag the call to action. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that we all have a responsibility to protect children and to hold people in positions of authority accountable, please like and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss stories about real courage, real justice, and real fathers who stand up for their children. Asterisk, asterisk. In the comments below, share your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed someone abuse their authority? Have you had to stand up against unfair treatment? Have you been inspired by someone who used their power to protect others? Your story matters. Your voice matters. And sharing it might just inspire someone else to find their own courage. Asterisk, asterisk. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next video. Asterisk, asterisk.